Hi, I'm Paul Moss, a PhD student at the University of Minnesota. I'd like to thank all of the presenters in this double session for their great talks today, and also AAG for their work in allowing this virtual conference to take place. And thanks in particular to Sarah, Alice, and Amba for the deep and wise words about plants, which I hope to build on in this final talk today on plant communication. My presentation is called Listening to Plant Voices, What Are Plants Saying? And it's based on a generous consideration of the phenomenon of intuitive human-plant communication. As Sarah, Alice, and Amba have pointed out, across culture and time, people have been directly receiving messages and useful guidance from plants. What can we learn from the content of this plant-human communication? I will argue that this communication can and does provide important insights and wisdom for our species at this challenging time on Earth. Why is this topic important and something to be considered seriously? Plants are a critical component of the Earth's biosphere. In many ways, this is a planet of plants, with almost all of the planet's land biomass consisting of these green beings. So when we consider living nature and ecosystems as a whole, it's important to recognize for the most part that this consists of members of the plant kingdom. However, in the Anthropocene, many plant worlds are now being destroyed or degraded through habitat destruction, loss of pollinators, pesticides, pollution, biotechnology, and other actions. If we are to posit that plants can communicate with humans in a way that humans can understand, and if many plants find their survival threatened by humans, it would seem that plants have a great incentive now to try and influence and interrupt those human activities which are destroying their ability to survive, and it appears that they are trying to do so. In talking about plant communication, that's not to say that plants speak to humans through physical sound waves, but instead in ways other than those through which humans typically hear sound. In some cases, human sensing of communication from plants relies on intuition, spiritual practices, or psychoactive drugs, as has been discussed in previous presentations this afternoon. Placing this in a larger context, plant communication is actually a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, which can be differentiated into the following 8 categories. First is direct communication by plants with other organisms through physical and measurable chemical means. Next is induced or proxy plant communication, as measured by the human use of mechanical recording techniques or sound-creating devices attached to plants. Then there's indirect communication by plants about their condition or health through their growth patterns, the degree to which they're thriving, or by their presence or absence in ecosystems. Then masked plant communication, in which the recipient of the communication doesn't realize that they're receiving purposeful messages. Then intuitive communication with plants, by plants with humans through mentally perceived thoughts or meaning. And this could include intuitive information also about appropriate medicinal uses of plants by humans. Then ritual or psychoactive compound-induced communication by plants with humans, as catalyzed by the use of psychoactive plant-derived drugs. There's administrative communication with plants, as indirectly evidenced by rewards or punishment from plants for approved or disapproved behavior from the plant's perspective. And finally, imaginative communication with plants by fiction writers as a component of literary stories in which plants appear to talk. I'll focus the remainder of this talk on the plant communication described in number 5 and to some extent number 6 above, which I will call intuitive plant-human communication, or IPC. Although typically dismissed in what we consider as the West, many people actively communicate with plants through intuitive methods and perceive what plants are saying in understandable words. I suggest that this may actually be a universal human ability, even if in our society it's often considered taboo to talk about it. In any case, over the past several decades, a number of individuals throughout the world have shared in published books messages that they have directly received from plants on a broad range of topics which provide useful material for study. These authors present intuitive plant communication as a real and literal phenomenon that is experienced between plants and humans, and that is my personal perspective as well. Messages in transcribed communications from plants often seek to alter human behavior and can therefore be also considered through a political lens as an assertion of power by plants. As such, many of the communications from plants published in the literature offer critique and seek to mold human beliefs and activities in ways that are mutually advantageous to both plants and humans. Let's listen to some examples of what 8 authors relay of plants' own words as they receive them. This is from Moreton Bay Fig. There is now a rapidly increasing number of people who do indeed talk to trees and other plants. This has been difficult for the present race of man to embrace. You talk to your animals with ease, feeling an empathy within the animal kingdom, for this is the kingdom in which mankind identifies himself. From a human viewpoint, the plant kingdom is beneath you. Thus you fail to realize that mankind is a synthesis of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms. That's via Rhodes, 1987. Thank you for listening, for being open to receive our gifts, for meeting us in true communion. This is from a pretty fern-like plant, via Gagliano, 2018. From Golden Conifer. We are happily established here, but we are always glad to make the conscious contact, for our intelligence is. We ourselves are very much alive, and unawareness of this fact on the part of humanity seems an inexplicable waste. Why do you go around in little watertight worlds of your own, as if you were the only intelligence, when all around you our world is bursting with awareness, full of the knowledge and truth that the Creator gives us, and which would be of inestimable value to you? That's through McLean, 2006. We are alive. We are a life form, a life force, and valuable assets to humans and all of the planet. We want to be honored for our contributions to humans and as a part of all nature. That's from Trees and All Plants via Conroy and Alexander, 2011. This from Lettuce. Why don't others talk to us as you do? They could, you know. It's interesting for me to be in the same place as somebody who acts as if we are not together, ignoring me. I don't need much attention. I just want to say that it's curious to be alive and pulsing with energy, but the one near you, tending you, seems to ignore this, thinking you are like a stone or dirt. They do not know that we all live and live together. That's via Cabarga, 1997. From Banana. When you cause damage beyond your immediate needs, such as you do with pollution, you are trespassing against certain plant kingdoms. These kingdoms are then unclear of your motivation, and they may find some way to let you know. If you have a type of fish or plant that is your food, and they can no longer be found, it is because the kingdom is expressing some form of effect for having been trespassed against. That's via Shapiro and Rapkin, 1991. They are warmed by our embers with no thanks for what we have offered. It's not that we need the thanks, for we are happy to serve in whatever way creation brings to us, but mankind would do well to have appreciation for its own evolution, its own connection to all that is. It is the loss of this connection that is a great part of the demise of humanity. From Hemlock via Campbell, 2018. And last, you monkeys only think you're running things. From Ayahuasca, it's actually more than one plant, via McKenna, 2005. Keeping in mind that these communications are presented by these authors as real, it's important to note that claims about the reality of intuitive plant communication frequently face deep skepticism for the following reasons. First, one common challenge relates to the lack of conventional scientific understanding regarding the mechanism for such communication. Second, plants are not typically considered to have the intellectual or physiological capacity to communicate meaningfully with humans. Third, there are also concerns about possible deception, delusion, or projection on part of humans experiencing this communication. And fourth, most Westerners have a conflict of interest in objectively addressing this topic, in that it's more convenient for us to continue to use plants as raw materials and resources if we do not trouble our assumptions about plants. In other words, there is not much incentive for us to explore the extent of plant intelligence and capacity, given the strong materialist interest we have in continuing to view plants as inert resources for meeting our needs and wants. An additional factor contributing to disregard of plant communication relates to what's called plant blindness, as discussed by Wandersee and Schussler 2001. The authors define this term as the inability to see or notice the plants in one's own environment, leading to the inability to recognize the importance of plants in the biosphere and in human affairs, the inability to appreciate the aesthetic and unique biological features of the life forms belonging to the plant kingdom, and the misguided anthropocentric ranking of plants as inferior to animals, leading to the erroneous conclusion that they are unworthy of human consideration. One might reasonably conclude that if people do not even tend to see plants, they will be less likely to recognize plants as active beings and to consciously seek to engage in communication with them. Based on the factors above, there are therefore clearly significant challenges to a broader acceptance of the reality of intuitive plant communication from a conventional materialist perspective. However, when one considers the spiritual and religious dimensions of the phenomenon, more openness to accepting IPC can emerge. There is significant literature that explores the important connections between religion, spirituality, and geography, such as Gergen 2015, Holloway and Valens 2002, Johnson and Merton 2007, and Pinelli 2008 and 2010. And IPC fits comfortably within certain ontological conceptions of non-human beings, such as panpsychism, which is common to many cultures. According to Skrbina 2007, quote, panpsychism, roughly speaking, is the view that all things have a mind or mind-like quality, unquote. Skrbina asserts that, quote, for most of humanity, for most of history, panpsychism has been an accepted and respected view of the world, unquote. As stated by the late Australian philosopher Val Plumwood in her 2002 book, Environmental Culture, in a section on communicative interspecies ethics, quote, perhaps the most important task for human beings is not to search the stars to converse with cosmic beings, but to learn to communicate with the other species that share this planet with us, unquote. I assert that using our non-cerebral senses and incorporating spiritual forms of knowing are an integral part of what makes us human and are necessary for understanding the world and its other inhabitants. This is consistent with Tiwa scholar Gregory Cajete's concept of native science, as discussed in his 2000 book of that title, which is, quote, about creating the inner sensibilities of humans, or the inner ear, which hears the subtle voice of nature, unquote. Indigenous people clearly have much to say and to offer on the topic of engaging with plants, from which non-Indigenous people can learn. For example, in her book Braiding Sweetgrass 2013, Potawatomi scholar Robin Wall Kimmerer states that, quote, it's not just changes in policies that we need, but also changes to the heart, unquote. She discusses extensively the importance of gratitude, respect, reciprocity, and relationship in human connections with plants, and how plants can be teachers that provide important guidance to humans. Although the idea of plant-human communication doesn't fit comfortably within ontological and cosmological perspectives commonly held in the West, I argue that it is nevertheless necessary to approach these communications seriously, particularly in light of Alice and Amba's noting earlier that, quote, no data is irrelevant, unquote. It is particularly important to further investigate and explore the meaning of communications between plants and humans because of the possibilities offered for enhancing mutual survivability on this green planet. Increasing common cause between humans and plants can help to allow the Earth to remain survivable for humans and plants, as well as for all other organisms. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions or would like a reference list, just feel free to contact me. At this time, we have a few minutes for your questions as submitted through the chat function on Vimeo, which can be directed at any of the session number 2 presenters. Thanks again.